Hey, how you doing? How you doing? I am Terry. I am your host for this channel, and I'm going to talk about branding. Now, real quickly, I've done several videos, but I really never dug into my background. I am a veteran, 20-year veteran, spent 17 years in human resources, got out, spent 15 years working at a college in education administration, spent another 4 years working as a human resource specialist, spent another 5 years, a little over 5 years, working for Department of Labor as a trainer, facilitator for service members as they departed the U.S. military. And we talked a lot about branding. And in between all that, I did sales for Sony and I did sales for Sears. So I know a little bit about Sears, sales and marketing and branding. So I know a little bit about that. So I'm talking about branding real quick. And let me give you the definition of branding so you can see it real quick. And then we'll move on. The definition of branding is the process of creating a unique identity for a business, product, or service. It involves shaping how people perceive the business, and it includes elements like logos, taglines, and visual design. Branding is not just about design, it is a strategic discipline that fosters customer loyalty and long-term value. So that's what branding is. And I'm going to say this real quick. We all are a type of brand. When you go out into this market and you're trying to get this what we call a life-changing job, a high value career, what you're doing, you're branding yourself. When you do a resume, you're marketing and branding. You do a LinkedIn account, you're branding. Your social media, it's branding. Everything you're doing is branding. You're selling, you're marketing your skill set to an employer. And that's if you out there getting a job. Now, if you're out there and you're running a business, then of course you're branding. And your branding is important. You got to be careful how you sell your brand. One of the dangers in 2025, because I've been doing some of these political semi-commentaries, but one of the dangers is that political system now. Because, look, here's the thing. They're crazy people, or what I call nuts, on the right-hand side and the left. There's nuts on the left and there's nuts on the right. Just because they're Republicans don't mean they're all nuts. Just because they're Democrats don't mean they're all nuts. But they're nuts on both sides. And you got to realize that you're out in this market, and some of these nuts, what they do is they will hold you accountable to your political affiliation. So you got to be very careful now in 2025, because people, what we do, we live in these bubbles. And so you might have a certain brand, but you're identifying yourself a certain way. And they're looking at, oh, here's a Trumper. I ain't a Trumper. Here's a MAGA person. And then the other person looking at you, hey, he's far left, man. He's weird, man. I ain't hiring that person. So you never know. They don't tell you that, but I'm telling you, people think like that. I also sat in on a lot of hiring events and sat on a lot of hiring boards and stuff like that, and interview panels. So I know what I'm talking about. So you got to be careful now, but you want to identify your brand. It want to be something positive. You should have your social media account should be all positive. Even your telephone, your answering should be positive. Your email should be positive. Everything should be positive because you're branding yourself. Just think about some of the companies and the history of branding. Just like I said, I worked with Sony for a little while. Well, Sony's a big name brand, and Sony was very, very proprietary with some of their services. For example, Sony and Panasonic created the Blu-ray technology, and for years they wouldn't give it up. Man, that's why PlayStation would have a Blu-ray for a long time. Xbox didn't, because Sony owned the technology. So you got to be mindful of that. And they're very proud of the technology. That's why when you go buy a Sony television, have you noticed Sony televisions are a little bit more expensive than the rest of the televisions? And as a Sony salesperson, I got a friend of mine still a Sony salesperson. That's one of the things. Well, the Sony, our prices are this, that, another thing we could, but that's just how it is because of the quality and workmanship Sony does in their branding. And Sony just don't do, and as you look at Sony, they just don't do televisions, they do speakers, they do all kinds of audio, they do movies, they do music. Sony's a big company. Same thing with Samsung. Notice how Samsung do televisions, but they also do telephones, and they do Sony does telephones too, but most of their telephone they sell in the Orient, just so you know that. But they do that, and a lot of their stuff is tied together because they are big brands. And then what happens is when you're a brand like a Sony or a Samsung, think about yourself. When you buy that television, you buy a Samsung television, there's a great chance that you have a Samsung telephone. Or if you're into Apple, right? You got an iPhone, you might have an Apple computer. We identify certain brands and we like certain brands. That's what we do. We all think about it. You drink a certain alcoholic beverage, right? You want a certain car, all this is branding. You wear a certain pair of tennis shoes, right? Like me, I wear Converse and I wear New Balance. I have one pair of Nike and only got that because somebody bought me a Nike gym suit. But other than that, Converse and New Balance, that's what I wear. That's the brands I identify with. And it's funny as you're growing up how brands stick with you as a kid. Because when I was a kid, all we wore, I'm an old guy, so all we wore was Converse. If you wore anything about Converse, they talked about you. They talk about you, talk about your mama, talk about all that, talk about how broke you were. They didn't care because you didn't wear Converse. You could get away with Adidas, but Converse and Adidas is all you wore when I was growing up. That's brand identity. Think about it. Think about all these brands. And so you're a brand. And you got to understand that your brand, the employer's looking at. So the employer, he or she, are going to look at your social media. That's right. 90% of all employers look at your social media. That's what they do. Yeah, they go look at your Facebook. They go look at your Instagram. They see what kind of stuff you have on there. So you got to be mindful because why? You are a brand. Okay. And you got to understand it, especially you're out there seeking employment. Again, if you're a business, you're a brand. Real quickly, give you a quick story on branding. I went to a barbecue joint years ago, and so I went to this. Look, I'm in Texas. There's a barbecue joint on every other corner. You can find barbecue. It's But anyhow, I go to this barbecue joint. I go to business, so I walk in the place. I asked the guy a question about something. Hey, guy, what's that right there? Can't you read the sign? That's what he tell me, right? I looked at him. I did like we say in the Army, I did a bow face and I walked out. Why? I could buy barbecue anyway. I'm going there trying to do you business, and you're supposed to market your brand. He's supposed to provide customer service to me, okay? Because that's his brand. He's selling barbecue. What makes your business any better? In most cases, it's not necessarily the taste or the quality of the food. Don't get me wrong, you have to have quality food, but it's your customer service and how you market your brand. That's what customers go for. Look at Chick-fil-A. They ain't open on Sundays, right? But Chick-fil-A, when you drive up to a Chick-fil-A, and a lot of restaurants start copying Chick-fil-A, they got their people out there waiting for you to pull up. You don't have to pull up to the window. They get you before you get to the window. You notice that? Excellent customer service. And look at the lines at Chick-fil-A. Is their chicken any better any place else? Yeah, maybe. But I'm just being honest. But what tops it off is their customer service. They're selling a brand, okay? They're a brand. So you got to market your own particular brand, okay? You got to be serious about your brand. You can't be playing with that, okay? If you go to jail and you get incarcerated, you come out, what are you then? You're a convict. Until you prove otherwise, that's your brand. It's just the reality of life. That's how they're going to look at you. Until you prove yourself, you can overcome that. But initially, that's what people look at you. It's just the reality of life because that's your brand they see you as. And as you're branding with people, you also got to understand part of branding is the networking. I'll talk about networking a little later on. But you are a brand. got a few minutes. Let's talk about some bad branding decisions. Just some bad branding decisions. Just a little while ago, uh, there was a restaurant that decided they're going to change their name, right? They're going to change their name, right? And not really change it, but change the way they do things, right? Y'all probably know what I'm talking about. But anyhow, they want to change the way they do things. They had this old style. You walked in there, it looked like an old country place. They had all the old country clothes in there, country trinkets. They had the rocking chairs on the porch. And all of a sudden they say, we want to update ourselves. Man, those people started getting mail and stuff from customers all across America. They stopped that plan. You know why? Because that's their brand. Why would you have a success? You're successful, but all of a sudden you're going to change the way you're doing. And people are used to going in there for that country feel. But they say, well, we want to get up to date because of this, that, and other thing. They're trying to be politically correct. But here's the thing, even with their political correctness, trying to get politically correct, when you go in their restaurant, you see black folks, white folks, Hispanic folks, it don't matter. People like that old time country feel. Asian folks, everybody be in that restaurant. They almost made a bad branding decision. There's another company a while back. They decided they wanted to do a marketing command, and they wanted to support the LGBT community, which I have nothing against. They could do what they want to do. But here was the problem. And I'm just saying, I'm just being real with you. Here's the problem with it when they did that. The problem was they could support whoever they want to support. It's their business. But what happened, their number one customer was the American redneck. Boy, I hope YouTube don't get mad at me. But it's the American redneck. And so they made every redneck in America mad because of this support. They could have supported that person, gave them some money, and let them, but it went out public. Then they had to come back and they backtracked. Oh, our marketing person made a bad decision. No, that didn't. Y'all had a meeting about that. Why wasn't somebody up in that meeting say, hey, ain't we gonna offend the American redneck? Nobody said that. And so what happens is, I don't know how much money they lost, but I know all these crazy videos were being posted by the American redneck. All these crazy videos about that beer because they wanted to support. They could support whoever they want. I ain't got nothing against that. I'm just telling you that's what happened. But that was a bad branding decision, okay? Look, there's plenty of companies that support LGBT, okay? Plenty of companies. They just don't put it all out in your face, Those people need jobs too, Those people need jobs too. They need to be loved. Everybody should be loved. They need to be loved too. So that's my thing on that. But my whole point is, you got to be careful in 2025 how you market yourself, okay? Because you are a brand, okay? You are a brand, okay? That's all I have for you. Love you. You have a good evening.